All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to begin our next section, which is the geometry and measurement section. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to do a little revision for some basic geometric facts. So we'll be looking at our book and taking a few notes and redefining some terms that hopefully will not be new to you. But if they are, don't worry about it. We're going to define them and make sure that everyone is on the same page and understanding what's going on. Okay, so let's just go to the book because their pictures are way better than what I can draw. So this is chapter 9 of your book, page 167, but we're actually going to start a little bit further down. Okay, here we go. So the first thing we want to talk about is the idea of a polygon. Now, a polygon is any closed two-dimensional shape with straight line edges that do not cross. Now, I'll give you a minute to write that down. So, and while you're writing it down, you can look at a couple of these examples. So here, this triangle is a polygon because it's all straight lines and they all connect together. This trapezium is a polygon because it's all straight lines and they all connect together to make a solid shape. Here, this one is not a polygon because there is no bottom line connecting it, so it's not solid. In other words, it's not a closed shape. And this, the next one is not a polygon because it has a curve in it. Can't have any curves. They always have to be straight lines. Okay? An important thing to remember about polygons is that even though they have corners, they have no real beginning or end. So this is a one continuous line, even though we have these corners, okay? And we usually think of this part and this part, so with the A, B, C, D, all of those as being distinct lines, and they behave that way when we're dealing with formulas, but in reality, it's all one shape. Okay? All right. So, let's move on. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about, other than the idea of a polygon, is we need to review a little bit of our work with angles. Now, hopefully this has happened. You've had some work with angles, but if not, don't worry about it. We're going to review it carefully. So, wherever two lines meet, an angle is formed between them. Right? So if you look here, these two lines meet at B, and this space in between them forms an angle. Now, this one's showing the angle in the middle, but you also have an angle going around either side. Both sides are an angle. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means to you and how to write that in the notation. Now, the notation for angle, there are two notations. You can write angle ABC. This is angle ABC. And you can put a little hat on it, and that is a symbol for angle. Or you may see this little symbol for angle with ABC afterwards. Both of those mean exactly the same thing. This book uses this. Most other books that I've seen in the higher level books typically use this. They say angle ABC. This one says ABC is an angle. This one says angle ABC. Same difference. But what you do need to notice is what's in the middle. If you look at both of these notations, B is in the middle. And that's because B is in the middle of the angle. That is something called the vertex of the angle. Okay? So it's a really important part of it, and it always has to be in the middle when you're naming an angle. Okay? Make sure that it's always in the middle. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to review a few of the properties, a few special types of angles. So what you need to always remember is that we classify angles according to their size. So the size of the angle gives the type of name. So angles are always classified by size. Okay? Now, sometimes it's going to look like you're classifying them by their shape, but it really has more to do with their size. And we also need to revision a little bit about the fact that angles are always measured in units called degrees. And the symbol for degrees is that little 0 floating up at the top, just behind the number. Where an exponent or an index would normally be, you'll see that little symbol, and that talks about degrees. And we'll talk a little bit more about degrees as we go, and kind of remind you of some of the properties. Okay? All right. So let's look at a few of the most common ones. Here, the first ones, we're going to talk about some very specific types of angles. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is what happens when you just have a straight line with no points on it. In that case, our angle is literally going all the way around, a complete revolution, and it's actually called a revolution. So a revolution is one complete turn, and it equals 360 degrees because it makes a whole circle, and any circle is always 360 degrees. So if you start in one spot and come all the way back and end at exactly the same spot, then that's a revolution, and the measurement is 360 degrees. So you need to know the name of it, you need to know that it's a complete turn, and you need to know the number of degrees. So those are the three things that are really important about it. Okay. The next one is something called a straight angle. Now these look very similar to revolutions, but do you notice that this one has a point in the center of it? So what we're doing is we're measuring the angle around that point. Okay, so we're not at the end of the line, which is where we'd get a revolution. We're in the middle on the line. And if that's the case, we're only going a half a turn, so it's called a straight angle. And if you think about it, it's an angle that's on a straight line, so that's where straight angle comes from. And its measure is half of a revolution, in other words, 180 degrees. So here's what's important. The name of it is a straight angle. It is half a turn, in other words, half a circle, and its measure is always 180 degrees. Okay, so the last one is something called a right angle, and I know you've dealt with these quite a lot. A right angle is a quarter turn, right? So in other words, it's making a perfect corner. And do you see this little square here? That is the typical way of indicating that an angle is a right angle. So if I draw something that looks like a right angle, but I don't put that little square in it, or I don't tell you that it's a right angle, or I don't tell you that it's 90 degrees, then you cannot assume that it's a right angle. You must have some notation indicating that it's a right angle. Okay? So don't just assume that it looks like a right angle. So it's a quarter turn, and a right angle is 90 degrees, 1/4 of the 360 degree full revolution. So here's what's important. Right angle, quarter turn, 90 degrees, and the symbol. Make sure you're watching to say. Now there are three different ways they can say that something is a right angle. They can say it is a right angle in words, they can give you the symbol, or they can give you the number of degrees. So three different ways of identifying a right angle. They are such an incredibly important angle. We're going to work with them quite a lot. All right, now hopefully none of this information is brand new to you, but if it is, doesn't matter. We've covered everything that you need to know about them. You're going to need to recognize what kind of angle it is, give it a name, and you're going to have to identify the degrees of it. Okay? All right, let's move on. Continuing with recognizing angles by their sides, we have three more. Now these don't come out to be identical all the time. They're going to give you pictures that represent a sample of it. But if something is one of these angles, it can be lots of different sizes. So we're going to talk about having a size between a certain amount. And the first one we're going to talk about is an acute angle. And yes, an acute angle is this small, cute little angle, right? A cute little angle. In this case, that means it's less than 1/4 of a turn and has an angle size between 0 and 90 degrees. So it has to be between those two values. Okay? Can't be 0 degrees because that would be a revolution if it went all the way around, or just not an angle at all. Can't be 90 degrees because 90 degrees is a right angle. So this is anything in between those two values, right? Between and not including. So these are acute little angles. 3 pieces of information: acute, less than 1/4 of a turn, between 0 and 90 degrees. So anything smaller than a right angle is an acute angle. The next one is something called an obtuse angle. Obtuse, think like obese, big, okay? And in that case, it's bigger than 90 degrees, but it can't be a straight angle because that one's used, right? We've already used straight angle, so it can't be a straight line, but it can be anything bigger than a right angle and smaller than a straight angle. So that one's between 1/4 and 1/2 of a turn, and its measure is 90 degrees to 180 degrees. So you see these are all referring back to those special measurements: 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 360 degrees. Okay. And finally, the last one is something called a reflex angle. Now, a reflex angle is between 1/2 a turn and 1 full turn. So in other words, if this was a straight angle, you see the reflex angle is bigger than the straight angle. And that is between 180 degrees and 360 degrees. So that's everything else bigger than a straight angle, all the way up till you hit a revolution. So key phrases there. Oops, I forgot to do that. For obtuse, type of turn, measurement. For reflex angle, it's the name, what it means, and the measurements. So you see that the key parts are always the same. You just need to memorize which one is which. Okay? So what I want you to do is just practice and memorize these names and what they mean, and especially their measurements. Make sure you know those measurements. You need to have this information in your head, okay? So make sure you practice that. So that's what your job is until we meet again, is to simply practice those. Okay?